Hi there. Welcome to Why We Are Christians. I'm Stephanie Erickson, your host for today, and I'm here with Rod Schaubroeck from San Rafael, California. We're super glad to have you here, Rod. You have a fabulous story, which we can't wait to hear. We're going to talk. Rod has had the unique experience to be a missionary in Africa with his wife and his whole family. And so we want to talk a little bit about that today. In fact, we want to talk a lot about that today. But we also, let's start with just a little bit of background. You have told me that really you've been a believer since you were 3 years old.
Yeah.
So you must have been raised in the church, had a Christian family. Is that right?
You know, my mom was a very strong believer. My dad, less so. I think he acknowledged faith, but if it was up to him, I don't think we would have gone to church. I can remember when I was 3 hearing about Satan and hell and stamping on the ground because I thought hell was down. And it was a very rudimentary theology, but it pointed to the fact that I believed that there was more to this world than just what we saw, and that there was good and evil, a God that loved us. And of course, my understanding and faith grew, but there was always something there.
Okay, this big shift in your life. So people didn't see like the old Rod and the new Rod. It was just sort of the consistent, faithful Rod. But at some point in your life, you did kind of have to confront your faith and figure out, is this really real for me? Or how do I feel about this? So let's hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there were a couple points on the path where I could have diverged. But like you say, I often feel like I don't have an exciting testimony because there wasn't this radical turn in my life. It was just kind of on the same path. But when I was 16, I heard that people in my church were getting baptized. And so I went to the pastor and said, I wanted to be baptized. And he said, well, when did you accept Christ as your Savior? And I said, well, I don't remember when. And he said, well, you got to do that first. And so I went to the classes, and then it was a New Year's Eve service in 1978. And I was ready because I had always believed, but I kind of made a public commitment that night and then was baptized. And again, I don't know if that changed a whole lot because I was still going to youth group and trying to live the right life even before that. But I think a big moment in my life came, I went to UC Santa Barbara, about 300 miles from home, as a freshman. And I was in this dorm with 1,300 other people, and it was Monday morning, and in the cafeteria, and I got my tray and I sat down with it, and I thought, you know, I've never publicly prayed before, but I'm going to do it this time. You know, it's a new world, a new life. I'm at school, I'm going to start, right? And I said, thank you for this food, Lord, and please help me to find the right people to be involved with here. And so I prayed that, and I looked up, and there were these 2 beautiful young women smiling down at me. They said, hi, would you like to sit at our table? And I'm like, yes, God, you know. And,
I could go for this.
So I went and sat at their table. I was a little disappointed that there were other people at the table as well. And it turned out to be the Inter-Varsity Christian Fellowship reunion from the year before.
Oh, wow.
And from that moment, I was really involved with Inter-Varsity Christian Fellowship. And it was the second largest chapter in the country. My senior year, there was 400 people in the chapter. And I was involved in the missions committee and then the large group chairman. And my senior year, I was the president of the chapter. But, you know, I got involved in missions through that. And so that was really a moment in my life where I felt God directed me and answered directly that prayer that put me in touch with the right people. And so at Santa Barbara, I think there were a lot of forces against believing in Christ.
Like what?
Like my anthropology professor, I can remember his name was Simons, and I'm sure he was a good professor, but he was very anti-Christian, and he mocked believers for believing because it was so obvious that we had evolved from apes and
So
other things.
he actually mocked them when he was giving lectures
Yes.
and to the whole class.
Yes.
So you felt like sort of, yeah.
I mean,
that'd be
it
hard
was
to
one of
take.
those major 500 people in the class
Right.
kind of thing, you know.
And most people laughed when he would mock because
right,
they went
and
along
they
with him.
would
and-
quote Bishop Ussher, who believed the world was founded in 4004 BC, and you're an idiot if you think that too. And it wasn't just that. I mean,
Yeah.
there were science classes, there were literature classes that, you know, mocked faith.
Right.
And then, apart from that, we had students who were very wrapped up in sensuality, the free love and sex and the drugs and stuff. You know, it was a beautiful place, beach town.
UC Santa Barbara, you
UC
said?
Santa Barbara.
Beautiful.
So there were a lot of temptations out there and a lot of reasons to say, okay, that was a time in my past, but now I'm going to go in a different direction.
Yeah, I'll take a vacation for 4 years.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to believe in Christ, but I wanted it to be the truth. I mean, I wanted to be a truth follower. And so there was this group of people, maybe 20, 30, 40 of us, who would come back from these lectures and be partially destroyed. And we'd say, well, what do we do with this? You know, and there would be other answers of, well, that's one way of looking at it, but you know, here's some truths about Jesus and his reality. And I think by the time I graduated college, I was very comfortably convinced that of the rudimentary facts of the gospel, that Jesus was a real person who lived in Palestine 2,000 years ago, that he was crucified by the Romans and the Jewish Sanhedrin, that he really did die, and that he really rose from the dead, and that we can believe his words, that the Bible was reliable, and that what he said to us, how to follow him, how to make disciples, that we're forgiven, that we have an eternal home with him, that these things are true. So I left with a confidence in that.
This is interesting because you know, we go to college to get our education, which is always pretty much different, especially if it's secular. It doesn't agree with faith. But you went to college for those reasons, to get a degree, but you also went to college and got a degree in faith.
Yeah, that's really well said. And you know, when I was in missions, the other missionaries were quite biased towards Christian schools like Bible colleges and Christian liberal arts schools. And I didn't feel that way about my children. I thought, you know, my faith grew at the secular university. The reality is that's not the case for everyone. A lot of times people's faith is shipwrecked. And I had found a good, strong Christian group there. And so it's not like I would recommend send your kid to secular university and grow in your faith, but that was the reality for me.
Wow.
When my children went to school, I encourage all of them. I'm like, get a Christian group and a church. By the end of your first semester, please try to find that. You know.
How many kids do you have?
I have 3 children.
And where do they go to school?
Shannon is now 27. She went to Harvard.
Wow.
And then Caleb, my second, is 26, and he went to the University of the South, Sewanee in Tennessee. And then Joshua, my youngest, is 24, and he went to Duke University in North Carolina.
Wow. So. Pretty accomplished kids you have there.
You know,
educated.
When we went to Africa, we thought, oh, our poor children are going to suffer as a result. But that's part of the cost of the gospel, you know. And they had this wonderful life education that universities liked, you know, that they were someone different. And so they got to go to these schools. So it was a gift from the Lord that they got to do that.
Well, that's great.
Tell us
Okay,
how
you
you-
kind of got into the big mission of going to Africa.
Well, I just kind of backed into it, but it all came from, again, that one moment on the path with those two girls in the cafeteria. I got involved in Inter-Varsity. That year, there was what they called the Bible and Life Conference that Inter-Varsity was putting on down in LA. So 20 of us went down to LA, and being college kids, they arranged for us to stay with Christian families rather than in hotels and stuff. And so I stayed in the home of a pastor, and I never met the pastor, but I stayed in his son's room with his son, who was, I think, 16 or 17. And his son had gone on a teen missions trip the summer before. And he was so excited about it. And he had brochures, and he showed me, and he says, "You should go. There's 30 different countries you could go to." And so I looked at this brochure, and I thought, Brazil, I've always wanted to go to the jungle. And so I signed up, raised the money, and that summer between my freshman and sophomore year, I went to Brazil.
Wow.
And so I saw during that summer the reality that God was an international God. And
Good
that,
point.
And
Good
that
point.
He used me to meet part of that need, and that there was a huge need. And,
How long were you in Brazil?
Sorry?
How long
How
were you
long?
there?
I think it was 7 weeks is all.
Oh,
Yeah, we were in just outside of Belém, Brazil, in the jungles in the Amazon. And so at the end of that summer, I made a commitment to God. I just said, "Look, if you want me to do missions for the rest of my life, I'll do it. I'm signing up if you want me to go." And so I made that commitment. And the next summer, I went with the same group to South Africa. And I fell in love with Africa at that point. And so at the time, beginning of my junior year in college, I knew I was going back to Africa eventually. But I wanted to be prepared and trained. So I finished my 4-year degree at Santa Barbara, and then got a 3-year Master's of Divinity degree, which was kind of a theological degree, but also had missions involved. And at the end of that time, I felt I was ready to go to Africa.
Where did you get the theological degree?
Went to Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary in the North Shore of Boston.
Oh, so
Yeah.
you went back east. Okay.
Yeah.
So I wanted to back up to Brazil.
Yeah.
You made a comment that God used you to fulfill some of the needs of the people.
Yeah.
How?
Yeah, I mean, pretty small potatoes, but there was a Christian youth camp. And it was out in the jungle. And, that was like if we go to the mountains, the people in the city there would go out to the jungle for their youth camp,
Oh, got it. Okay.
And so we built a dormitory for the Christian youth camp there. And so that wasn't a big deal. I mean, I just learned how to lay bricks, and we built a big general building. And on the weekends, we would go into the city and do puppet shows and stuff. And I don't know how much response there was to all of that. But I felt like, okay, I'm on the right team doing the right thing, so that's what I mean by there was a need, and I was helping some.
That building that you built, a lot of lives went through there.
Who knows? Yeah,
and they were
exactly.
touched.
Right.
And who knows, only God knows how many kids accepted Jesus in that building, and that's the kind of thing that we kind of
Really
forget
good
about
point, Stephanie.
sometimes.
Well, I think that's one of the things I've learned in close to 30 years of ministry is, there's this inward desire to be like the superstar, the Steph Curry of missions or whatever.
Right.
And, wasn't that fantastic? You did amazing. And that's not how it's ever worked for me. And I've realized that I'm maybe one person in a chain of 100 people taking the baton and moving it a little further for someone in their journey of faith. And sometimes I'm the seed planter, sometimes I'm the weeder or the waterer, and rarely I got to be the harvester and see the spiritual fruit. But the point is, be faithful in your little aspect of the job, and eventually there will be fruit, but you may not be around to see it.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have 3 kids
Yeah,
and you're married.
yeah,
So tell us a little bit about your wife,
yeah.
how you met your wife, and how she felt about going to the mission field.
Yeah. Yeah, Melanie, I was interning at San Mateo First Baptist back in the early 80s or mid 80s. And I was a singles intern between my college career and seminary career. And I knew I was going to be a missionary, and I was just starting to do some work toward that. And Melanie got on with American Airlines and got based in San Francisco. Wasn't a believer, but her roommate was, and she told Melanie to go to church one day. And they were going to church and they got lost. And they said, well, here's a church. And so they wound up at our church. And
Great.
so because I was a singles intern, I encouraged them a number of times to come back to church. And, at that point, Melanie was a beautiful woman and an attractive personality, but I wasn't really interested in her because she wasn't a believer and I was going to be a missionary.
Right, right.
But through the preaching and teaching at the church, she did become a believer. And I think one of my problems in life was I was always looking for my mate. And so I was always pushing the relationship too quickly.
Gotcha.
And I didn't with Melanie, and it allowed a true friendship to germinate and to grow into something healthy. And at some point, a year or two after we met each other, we realized, hey, we really like each other. And now, hey, you're a believer, maybe there's a possibility. And so Melanie had to kind of make the decision that if she was going to marry me, she was also going to be a missionary. That was kind of a package deal. And so she went on a summer mission and enjoyed it and thought, yeah, I can do this. And she, as she describes it, she said, I felt God was calling me to be your wife. And so that meant he was calling me to be in missions as well.
Wow, that's a beautiful thing to say.
That's how it went. And then when we went to missions, because she'd been a Navy brat, she was much more adaptable in missions than I actually wound up being. And so she wound up being our strength oftentimes, and so it was a good team.
How long were you married before you went to Africa?
We got married in mid '87, and we went in late '90. So about 3 years we were married.
So were all your kids born when you were in the mission field?
Shannon was 8 months old when we went to Africa, and people asked us.
Wow.
People asked us, well, are you going to take your child with you? It's like, I didn't, yeah, I think so. There's no place to leave her.
Praying about it.
Yeah. So, yeah, and then Caleb was born in Namibia. And then,
Say it again, in where?
Namibia. That's
Namibia.
German Southwest Africa.
Okay.
And then Joshua was born in Redwood City, California on home assignment. So.
Oh, so she was fully pregnant. You came home for a while.
Right, but they all
Wow.
grew up out there.
They did.
Yeah.
Wow, that's fascinating. Okay, so you were married 3 years.
Yeah.
And then were you part of a church, like a denomination, where they, the mission board sends you to a place, or like how did you get assigned to where you went?
Okay, great question. So during in San Mateo, I was part of an American Baptist church. I'd grown up in an independent Baptist. When we went back to Gordon Conwell, we got involved with an American Baptist church there as well. And so we thought about going with the American Baptist, a denominational mission. The only problem is with a denominational mission, there's only a certain amount of money that can be used for missions.
Right.
And so then they look at the most qualified or people who have more experience, or sometimes you get in a pipeline, you have to wait 8 or 10 years before you can go, kind of thing.
Wow.
I was hot to try it. I wanted to get out there,
Yeah.
And, I guess I had a fear of also getting stuck in America because I'd seen a lot of other people with intentions, and then they got pregnant, they had kids, and then they had to rent a house or buy a house, and then they got furniture, and they started these kind of like Gulliver getting tied down, you know. And so when we got married, we said no presents. We didn't want, you know, stuff, and you know, we got some money, which was great, but we didn't have a lot of things. And we went to Africa with 5 trunks. That was it. And we came 22 years later. We came back with 5 trunks. That was all. Yeah.
Wow,
So
that's really neat.
yeah.
Wow.
But so.
You travel light.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Try to. But anyway, we went to an Urbana missions conference that's put on by Inter-Varsity Fellowship. And they have over 200 mission organizations represented there. And so there's probably about 20 that go to Africa. And so we focus on those because that was where my heart was. I wanted to go back to Africa. And Africa Inland Mission seemed like the best fit for us. Yeah.
So it seemed like the best fit because?
Well, here's part of the story. I didn't ask. I think I'm okay saying this with Melanie, but when she was 19, she had gotten married, and then she got divorced at 22. Before I met her, before she came to the Lord, and so we went to one organization that was going to Africa. I won't mention them. They're a really good organization. They were excited. This young couple, they were all excited about us, and they started filling things out. And the man said, "So I just have to ask this. I know it doesn't apply to you, but have either of you ever been divorced?" And Melanie said, "Well, yeah. Is that a problem?" And he said, "Yeah, I'm sorry, it actually is."
So that totally just disqualified you.
Right, right. And so so then, you know,
like,
we didn't spend another hour. We didn't want to spend another hour with the next group, right? So we went to the next group. Our first question is, do you take divorced people?
That's smart.
No. Right? So we went to the next.
A process
No.
of elimination.
So after about the 5th or 6th time of that, we went into the stairwell of the armory of where this building was, and we just cried, and
You're just like,
it was hard.
what do we?
Yeah.
Why are we here? This,
Right.
I mean, we didn't expect to run into this brick wall.
Exactly. And Mel, I felt bad because Mel said I shouldn't have married you.
Aw, poor Mel.
Yeah. And I said, look, you know, if we have to do our own organization, we're going.
You were so determined.
yeah.
You were doing it.
So we came to AIM after Inland Mission, and we asked that question. They said, well, it depends. You know, we do a case-by-case basis, you know. And so we're like, okay, well, let's talk. And so that was one of the reasons they were willing to accept us, you know. That's why we went with them.
I like that.
But the other reason is they were really good with, there's some organizations, and almost all these organizations have changed their policy on divorcees because it's such a part of
Kind
our
of a
society
sign of the
now.
times, right?
But a lot of organizations would require you to send your children to boarding school at a certain time, and we didn't want other people telling us what to do with our kids. And so AIM said, you can do whatever you want. We have boarding schools, but you can homeschool or you can send to local school. You know, we won't tell you, kind of thing. I'm like, yeah, well, that's what I want because they're my kids, and you know, I don't want someone else. Anyway, it was a good organization, and so we kind of courted with them and went through the process with them while we were in seminary. And when I finished seminary, we were ready to go. We graduated in May. In October, we were in Africa. So.
Graduating. Wow.
Yeah.
That was quick.
Yeah.
But you had been, like you said, courting with them. You'd been talking to them, and
Right.
and how many people did they send to Africa? Well, I mean, I don't know if you even know the answer to that.
Yeah,
question,
there's about 800
wow.
missionaries with African Mission, but they have a lot of sending countries, UK and Canada,
Okay, gotcha.
Brazil, US, South Africa, England, Europe, and Australia, New Zealand. So.
You know, your story about getting rejected, it touches me because I want to say, you know, look back again how the hand of God was working. I mean, he knew what agency he wanted you to hook up with.
That's right.
But you had to go through a lot of rejection, and it hurt. And it made you it hurt, and I don't know if it made you doubt, but I mean, you know, you're like, what are we doing this for? What's going on?
Yeah.
So it witnesses to me, and I think probably to a lot of the people that are watching this, Rod, because, you know, we do have to go through those setbacks in our lives, and when we just don't understand why. We really don't get it, because obviously we can't see forward. And so I think we can all relate with you when you were crying in the hallway of the armory. It's a hard time.
Yeah.
But the hard times, if we just keep in the faith, the hard times, we come out of them, and then we can see why.
Yeah.
And maybe we don't see why. Maybe we never do see why, but that's where faith comes in, right?
Absolutely.
Wow. Well, that's good. Okay, so we are. So it's October. You're going. Your daughter was born though.
She was born in February. Yeah.
Okay, so she was born in February. You graduated in May.
Right.
You went in October. 8 months old. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh! But you didn't have a lot. You were 5 trunks. At
Yeah.
least one of those trunks must have been baby stuff.
It was all diapers. Yeah. We went through all of our diapers in the first month, and then we said, "What are we going to do?" So.
What did you do? That's a good.
Oh, well, we used cloth diapers, which was fine, but you know, we were so addicted to disposable that you know, it's like, okay, now we're gonna have to figure out the system because there were no
washer, dryers. Did you have the modern conveniences when you went there?
Some.
Okay.
Some in Namibia, but we just used diapers in a bucket,
a pail,
and then we rinse them out and hang them up. And stuff.
Yeah.
Which was really interesting because that was my job, and and when the Africans saw me doing that, they thought we were crazy. They felt so sorry for me because that was woman's work, you know.
Right.
And it was one of those cultural things that you balance because on the one hand, you know, I wanted to model for them what a loving husband, a Christian husband would do. But on the other, I didn't want to destroy my credibility so much with them that I didn't have a voice or platform. But it didn't seem to ruin my reputation too badly.
At least that didn't ruin your reputation.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh, shoot. Well, this is really great. So what we're going to do is we're going to sort of wind this segment down. And the next segment that we have you here, thank you for staying for 2 segments, we're going to really get more in depth about Africa because you were there for how many years?
22 years.
For 22 years. So there's a lot to tell in that story. So we're just getting warmed up. Thank you so much for being with us. And Rod Schaubroeck here on Why We Are Christians. Stay tuned for the next episode. See you then.